Hello everyone, this is Dr. Manisha Mirtha and today we would be speaking on the topic accommodating diversity in plural society, issues of multiculturalism and toleration. As you can see, the topic includes a number of terms which try to explain a very interdependent meaning of a concept. So, throughout the lecture, in fact, there will be two parts of this lecture, and throughout both the lectures, we will be trying to understand these terms because the topic includes terms like multiculturalism, pluralism, diversity, toleration. So, what is the interconnection between these two terms is what we will be trying to understand in today's program. So, the purpose of today's lecture is to familiarize you with the idea of multiculturalism, tolerance and diversity. But for all of this, we need to first of all understand what exactly is pluralism. If we had to give a kind of a definition for pluralism, we could say that it is a state of society in which members of diverse ethnic, racial, religious or social groups maintain an autonomous participation in the development of their traditional culture or special interest within the confines of a common civilization. Now, this concept refers to a basic quality of modern societies where a wide range of religious and political beliefs which are diverse, they are accepted, and where the ideal societies envisaged by different political parties may be incompatible with each other also. So, what this is trying to say is that in a society or in a political setup, there can be different perspectives which might be completely opposite to each other. Say for example, there might be radical socialist coexisting with right wing capitalists also at the same time. So, in pluralist societies, individuals can and must work out for themselves which values they adhere to and how they wish to live their lives. Pluralist societies therefore pose a challenge also, which is that individuals may enjoy a greater degree of personal liberty than ever before, but on the other hand, they need to work harder to bargain for an agreement and compromise, without which no community can survive. This raises the question as to which political system can provide the best framework for the organization of decision making in a pluralist society. If pluralist society is something where diverse perspectives can coexist, then the next question which arises is that what kind of political system would be able to promote this kind of a society better. So, there can be an authoritarian system which is, as we all know, a one party rule, or which could also be called as theocracy or even dictatorship. So, in this kind of a setup, the problem of pluralist society is set up by solving one player or giving one player the power to decide on everyone's behalf what lies in the common interest. This solution meets the challenge of pluralism by evading it in a way by sacrificing the liberty of individuals. The potential of conflict in such societies is suppressed definitely, but the price to be paid is a high one. So, many problems might not be solved properly and fairly because they are not articulated clearly. The other kind of a political system in which the societies can thrive is democracy. In a democracy, citizens basically agree on a set of principles, on rules of procedure and rights that allow them to disagree on many issues, but which also offers the tool to enable them to reach agreement by non-violent means. So, viewed in this perspective, democracy supports peace in a pluralist society by civilizing conflict rather than suppressing it. So, that is the major difference between an authoritarian regime and a democracy. In a democracy, the common interest is something to be worked out together and be bargained for. So, therefore, we could say that democracy could be that form of government where citizens are accorded basic rights as freedom of conscience, belief and expression, and when citizens use these rights, they will create disagreement and conflict. They will have to bargain for a solution also, and to ensure that they agree on the rules of how to handle the conflicts and finally solve them, citizens of pluralist democracies are deemed to enter into a social contract with all other citizens to abide within the social and political conventions of that society. So, this kind of a social contract is something that you can understand by this phrase which says to do unto others that you would have others do unto you, which basically means that if I want freedom, if I want tolerance, I owe the same to others also. This is the first principle of political obligation. So, such a social contract includes the principle of rule by majority. For some minority groups, the disadvantage of this is that their own radical vision may never be achieved through the ballot box, because the ballot box would definitely be supporting the majority view, and therefore the minority view might be disadvantaged in such a scenario. However, on the other hand, such societies guarantee the rights of political minorities to pursue legitimate political ends unhindered by the state. Thus, pluralist democracies always live with the possibility of the election of radical governments whose members might be inclined to restrict the activities of political opponents. That is why it is important to have legislations for human rights and freedom built into the constitution of democratic countries. So, keeping this in mind that the ballot box might reflect the perceptions and the values of the majority, thereby the state has to ensure that there are proper legislations and laws which are made in place so that the rights of minorities are also secured in such societies. So, we could say that pluralism as a political philosophy is the recognition and affirmation of diversity within a political body, which is seen to permit the peaceful coexistence of different interests, convictions and lifestyles. While not all political pluralists advocate for a pluralist democracy, this is the most common stance because democracy is often viewed as the most fair and effective way to moderate between discrete values. One of the major proponents of this perspective, which is pluralism, Berlin says that let us have the courage of our admitted ignorance, of our doubts and uncertainties. At least we can try to discover what others require by making it possible for ourselves to know men as they truly are, by listening to them carefully and sympathetically and understanding them and their lives and their needs. So, these are some excerpts from what Berlin has spoken on pluralism, and therefore tries to encourage members of society to accommodate their differences by avoiding extremism. Extremism, as we all know, would mean adhering solely to one value or one philosophy, or in fact refusing to recognize something which is otherwise also legitimate. So, therefore, pluralism tries to encourage members to accommodate the differences by avoiding extremism and engaging in good faith dialogue. Pluralists also seek to construct or reform the social institutions in order to reflect and balance competing principles. So, by trying to understand this concept of pluralism, we could say that it is connected with the hope that the process of conflict and dialogue will result in a quasi-common good. This common good is not any abstract value or something which is set in stone. However, it is an attempt at balancing competing social interests and will thus constantly shift given present conditions. So, what we are trying to say over here is that pluralism is something which will try to find a midpoint amongst the competing interests. At the same time, this acceptance has also to be there that this midpoint will be eventually dynamic because social perceptions and social interests change. Proponents in the contemporary political philosophy of such a view, including, as we said, Berlin, and then there is Stuart Hampshire and Bernard Williams, all of these have spoken and supported the idea of pluralism. In fact, in the United States, President Eisenhower's middle ways were arguably motivated by a belief in political pluralism. For pluralism to function and to be successful in defining the common good, all groups have to agree to a minimal consensus that shared values are at least worth pursuing. So, this is a very important aspect, that the common belief and acceptance of those common values, which we said the quasi common good, also has to be there. The most important baseline value is thus of mutual respect, understanding or tolerance. If no such dialogue is possible, extremism and physical coercion are inevitable. So, this has to be ensured, and the state plays a very important role in promoting this. Now, we move on to the concept of cultural diversity. Cultural diversity is posing a challenge to states around the world, as various governments are facing demands from cultural minorities for recognition, protection and political autonomy, etc. within the territory of a state. So, along with the concept of pluralism is the concept of cultural diversity. Cultural diversity actually poses a threat to the governments and the states around the world, because cultural minorities which are spread throughout the world are also quite naturally so aiming for recognition and protection. There has been a rise of cultural diversity in various countries due to a number of factors. The factors, to name a few of the factors, it's demise of communism in Eastern Europe, which has led to demands of nationalism, rise in attraction of communitarian thinking. There is increase in various immigrants to Europe and other countries, emergence of indigenous people, movements demanding correction, forces, historical injustices meted out to them. So, therefore, there have been increased political activism of various kinds of religious conservatism or migration of people, and all of this poses a big threat to a multicultural or a plural society. As a result, the number of questions have become unavoidable in political theory, from the role of state in dealing with such cultural diversity to limitations of toleration, nature of citizenship and even rights of women. We will try to understand these critical aspects in the succeeding slides. In fact, before moving on to the concept of multiculturalism, it is also important to know issues of culture and identity, from which the idea of multiculturalism eventually flows. So, it is not possible to understand multiculturalism till you get a clear understanding of the relationship between culture, identity and diversity. There is difference between culture and nature. Culture is something which is passed on from one generation to the other, whereas nature, as we all know, is biological inheritance. So, culture encompasses traditional factors, religion, language, moral principles, social norms, etc. And identity politics, or the politics of difference as it is also known as, is increasing recognition of cultural differences in a society. So, culture is something which talks about our own learning, which is of religion, moral principles, etc., whereas identity politics is which gives us individuality in that culture. Identity is also a sense of unique and separate selfhood and may be multiple, like religion, ethnicity, gender, caste, religion, etc. Identity is equated with difference, as awareness of difference further magnifies an individual's sense of identity. This has led to politics of recognition, thereby meaning differences should be embraced. So, this is another virtue of pluralism, which says that differences are to be celebrated, they are to be embraced and not to be done away with or suppressed. This is the beauty of pluralism. With the rise in international migration and globalization, there has been intensification of identity politics around the globe too. So, cultural diversity has been a feature of various societies for a long time, because different dialects and traditions do coexist. In the contemporary context, we can talk about countries like India, Canada, US, UK, New Zealand, France, etc., who have strong cultural diversity. Cultural diversity has increased around the world, and highly homogeneous countries are becoming rare examples. As we have by now understood that pluralism is a concept which does not support homogenization. It is something which, as I said, celebrates heterogeneity. And with the passage of time, we have seen that cultural diversity has increased the kind of heterogeneity which is available, or which is present rather, in countries. Homogeneity has become a rare example now. Talking about diversity, it can be of various types. To name a few of the types of diversities, there can be religious diversity. India is a very good example of religious diversity. It is a country with diverse religions. The religious groups often differentiate from each other through factors like their dress code or public holidays, festivals, practices, etc. There can be diversity based on location also. There may be groups who see themselves as distinct from others due to their specific geographical location. Say for example, in UK, Scots distinguish themselves from others due to their location in the north. Although their culture is not so significantly different from others, but the geographical location is. So, there is diversity based on location. There can be diversity based on language also. So, linguistic diversity is another basis for the existence of diversity in a country. For example, the Quebec in Canada or the Catalans in Spain are good examples of linguistic diversity. Then there is racial diversity, which is the existence of different physical features, which gives rise to diversity based on race. So, these are different kinds of diversities which can exist in any state, not limited to our own country. Multiculturalism now, which emancipates from this cultural diversity, this concept of multiculturalism appeared in political theory in 70s and 80s, when it was used to denote a shift in public policy away from assimilation towards integration and acceptance of diverse cultures. To give an example, say in the US, the debate on multiculturalism started in the 1980s in the context of how the education system should respond to cultural diversity. The term multiculturalism is used to describe a society in which different cultures coexist, and it signifies attempts to balance diversity against cohesion. Apart from recognizing cultural diversity as what we have already spoken of, multiculturalism also advocates that such differences should be respected and publicly affirmed. It maintains respect for cultural differences and does not favor any assimilation of minority culture into the dominant one. It does not promote or it does not support the idea of engulfing the minority views into the majority view. It celebrates the differences. Instead of seeking a melting point in which minority groups assimilate into the majority culture, multiculturalism uses metaphors like a glorious mosaic of differences, where the minorities can maintain their distinctiveness. From the multicultural perspective, the public policy should not aim for standardization of cultural forms or any type of uniformity or homogeneity. Instead, heterogeneity should be maintained. The differences amongst various thinkers on how this has to be achieved. So, this is something which we have been saying, that heterogeneity is one of the key words for pluralism. Homogeneity is something which does not support cultural diversity of today's time. But then how has this heterogeneity to be supported and promoted by the state? Some argue that minority groups should be tolerated by leaving them free from state interference, also called as politics of indifference. Some argue that minority groups should be tolerated by leaving them free from state interference, also called politics of indifference. So, one of the views which is there says that the minority groups should be left free. There should be no interference in their conduct. Whereas there is another point of view which says that mere toleration of group differences falls short of treating the minority groups as equals, and there is a need for recognition and positive accommodation of minority group practices through difference and sensitive policies. So, just to repeat what I just spoke of, there are two perspectives. One which says that for tolerance to exist in any societies, the minority views should be let alone. They should be left to function on their own without any interference. Whereas the other perspective, which is one step forward, which says that just leaving them alone would not be sufficient. The state also needs to take a very proactive step in bringing in some kind of positive accommodation of these minorities. There has to be some kind of a positive discrimination also, so that there is an equitable distribution of resources. In his book, The Multiculturalism of Fear, Jacob Levy has divided the different sensitive policies into 8 categories. So, what he suggests is that there can be 8 kinds of ways through which policies can be floated in any society to ensure that there is recognition of these minorities. You might accept some of them or not, but it is important for us to understand all the 8 philosophies that he promotes. One of them is what he says: exemptions from generally applicable laws. Exemptions are based on a negative liberty pertaining to non-interference of state in certain matters as it could increase the burden on a certain group. Say for example, religious exemptions can be extended to a minority group so that they can maintain their identity. To give a more clear example, like in our own country, everyone who's driving a two-wheeler has to wear a helmet, but people who belong to the Sikh community are given a levy from that. So, this could be a kind of an example of exemptions from generally applicable laws. The second one is assistance rights. Certain rights are extended to rectify disadvantaged experiences by a certain group in comparison to the majority. This would actually include positive discrimination. Say for example, there can be some special kind of funding for schools or certain NGOs or some similar organizations. So, some kind of assistance which is given to these minority groups existing in the state. Another kind of policy inclusion could be symbolic claims, which means that all the cultures are represented by the symbols of a country on the grounds of equality. Say for example, the same laws apply for all. Not including the symbols from minority cultures could be seen as lack of respect and unequal treatment towards them. Another way could be recognition. It is a demand to integrate a cultural practice or a specific law into the larger society. Say for example, texts on inclusions of immigration should be there in the textbooks, say for example history textbooks, which shows that there is recognition of these groups in a multicultural society. Then there can be special representation rights also, which is intended to safeguard the groups which have been systematically marginalized in a bigger society. Say for example, they have this concept of reservation or extra seats which are set aside for minorities even in the parliament of a diverse nation. Then this concept of self-government, the cultural minorities may claim certain degrees of autonomy under demands of self-government also. This is required so that they can develop and preserve the culture. Further on, suggestions are on external rules, which involves restricting the freedom of the other people to preserve a certain culture. There can be internal rules also, and these rules restrict an individual's behavior within the group itself. For example, if somebody disobeys the rules of the group, the person can be ostracized or excommunicated. Apart from the above mentioned categories, multiculturalism has been used as an overarching term to signify the political and moral claims of other marginalized groups also, like the homosexuals or the gender stereotypes. Multiculturalism is not restricted to claims of culture and identity alone. as some critics have pointed out. Instead, it is also a matter of political power and economic interest, since it involves demands to rectify political and economic advantage suffered by people due to their membership of a marginalized group. It is very important that the economic support is given to these minorities. It is pertinent to mention that multicultural policies are not primarily about redistributive justice. Redistributive justice, as we all know, is how to allocate resources fairly amongst members of a society, taking into account factors such as wealth, income, social status, etc. So, multicultural policies are not necessarily about redistributive justice, but they may accidentally refer to the same at the same time. So, freedom from domination is one of the reasons why there is a need for multiculturalism, according to some experts, and they argue that one can be unfree, as they say, even if the person is not experiencing any interference. Say for example, a slave of a benevolent master. So, here special accommodation is not driven by a desire to protect valuable cultures or considerations of equality, but the desire to reduce domination. So, freedom from domination is one of the reasons why multiculturalism is supported by the experts. Some others who write with the post-colonial perspective give importance to historical background, as is the case with aboriginal sovereignty. They contend that history of state operation of a group should be the main factor in deciding whether group rights should be extended to that particular group or not. So, this was about today's multiculturalism. I will just sum up what we spoke of today. We started with the topic which had quite overlapping and interdependent terms. We tried to understand the meaning, nature and concept of the term pluralism, because that is very important to understand the topic in its totality. We tried to understand what kind of political system can ensure the concept of pluralism. It can thrive in a autocracy also, it can thrive in a plural society also, but what supports it is democracy. We also talked about the role of state in dealing with cultural diversity. We spoke of kinds of diversity, and then we spoke of the multiculturalism in India, policies to ensure multiculturalism. This is the first part of the concept of understanding multiculturalism, but the understanding of multiculturalism cannot be complete till we have a understanding of what a multicultural society also is. So, therefore, the two terms might seem quite synonym of each other, but there is a difference between the term multicultural society and multiculturalism. In the next part of this lecture, we will try to understand what multicultural society is, what kinds of multiculturalism can thrive in a society, and then we will try to look at the example which is our own country, India, as a good example of a diverse society which thrives on a multicultural perspective. The reasons behind it, the challenges to multiculturalism in our own country, and how we deal with that. So, I hope the topic was fruitful and you were able to have a fair understanding of the concept. So, it becomes very important for us to understand the difference between a multicultural society and multiculturalism. We will be dealing with different kinds of multicultural society in our next part of the topic, where we will be talking about segregation, assimilation and integration, and how that leads to multiculturalism. And then we will be dealing with various kinds of multiculturalism, like liberal multiculturalism, pluralist multiculturalism, cosmopolitan multiculturalism. This is something that we will be dealing with, which will give us an understanding of the two waves of multiculturalism which have been there in political theory. And with the limitation of multiculturalism, we will be ending the topic on the case study of India itself and the diversity of India, the factors leading to unity and the factors that threaten the unity of India, and that is how we will be trying to understand the concept of multiculturalism. I hope that was fruitful for you. We will meet back again. Thank you.